Hello, it's Kesha. Welcome and welcome back. We are on our next section of the Aquarian. We have just now left Jesus and the Council of the Sages, and we are moving on to the next phase of our journey. So let us center in real quick and then take that next step. So gently closing your eyes and taking a deep breath in and out. Another deep breath in and out. Deep breath in, picking up all the cares, concerns, worries, dramas of the week, and releasing them. If you feel corded or attached to any person or situation, just see those cords release and going back to spirit. They can be fed elsewhere. And if you feel yourself corded to any situation or person, release those cords. You too can be fed solely from spirit. And now see a column of white light coming down over us. Notice how it quickens the body as you breathe in that light. Notice how it enlivens your divine spark. Notice how you too become a pillar of light. And let's just lift our attention out of physicality and the worldly way and move into a space of peace, a space of oneness, of wisdom. Space of pure potentiality where all we need is available to us. Right now our greatest need is exploring wisdom and sharing love. And in that space, gently open your eyes. Nothing better than the beginning of these readings. Chapter 61. It came to pass when John, the son of Zacharias and Elizabeth, had finished all his studies in the Egyptian schools, that he returned to Hebron, where he abode for certain days. And he sought the wilderness and made his home in David's cave, where many years before he was instructed by the Egyptian sage, Methina. Some people called him Hermit of En-gedi, and others said he is the wild man of the hills. He clothed himself with skins of beasts. His food was carobs, honey, nuts, and fruits. When John was 30 years of age, he went into Jerusalem, and in the marketplace he sat in silence for 7 days. The common people and the priests and scribes and Pharisees came out in multitudes to see the silent hermit of the hills, but none were bold enough to ask him who he was. But when his silent fast was done, he stood forth in the midst of all and said, "Behold, the king has come. The prophets told of him. The wise men long have looked for him. Prepare, O Israel, prepare to meet your king." And that was all he said. And then he disappeared, and no one knew where he had gone. And there was great unrest through all of Jerusalem. The rulers heard the story of the hermit of the hills, and they sent couriers forth to talk with him, that they might know about the coming king, but they could not find him. And after certain days he came again into the marketplace, and all the city came to hear him speak. And he said, "Be not disturbed, you rulers of the state. The coming king is no antagonist. He seeks no place on any earthly throne. He comes the Prince of Peace, the King of righteousness and love. His kingdom is within the soul. The eyes of men shall see it not, and none can enter but the pure in heart. Prepare, O Israel, prepare to meet your king." Again, the hermit disappeared. The people strove to follow him, but he had drawn a veil about his form, and men could not see him. A Jewish feast day came, and Jerusalem was filled with Jews and proselytes from every part of Palestine. And John stood in the temple court and said, "Prepare, O Israel, prepare to meet your king. Lo, you have lived in sin, the poor cry in your streets, and you regard them not. Your neighbors, who are they? You have defrauded friend and foe alike. You worship God with voice and lip. Your hearts are far away and set on gold. Your priests have bound upon the people burdens far too great to bear. They live in ease upon the hard-earned wages of the poor. Your lawyers, doctors, scribes, or useless cumberers of the ground, they are but tumors on the body of the state. They toil not, neither do they spin, yet they consume the profits of your marts of trade. Your rulers are adulterers, extortioners, and thieves, regarding not the rights of man. And robbers ply their calling in the sacred halls. The holy temple you have sold to thieves. Their dens are in the sacred places set apart for prayer. Hear, hear, you people of of Jerusalem. Reform. Turn from your evil ways, or God will turn from you. And heathen from afar will come, and what is left of all your honor and fame will pass in one short hour. Prepare, Jerusalem, prepare to meet your king. He said no more. He left the court, and no one saw him go. The priests, the doctors, and the scribes were all in rage. They sought for John, intent to do him harm. They found him not. The common people stood in his defense. They said, "The hermit speaks the truth." And then the priests, the doctors, and the scribes were sore afraid. They said no more. They hid themselves away. Next day, John went again into the temple courts and said, "Prepare, O Israel, prepare to meet your king." The chief priests and the scribes would know the meaning of his words, they said. "Bold man, what is the purport of this message that you bring to Israel? If you be a seer and prophet, tell us plainly who has sent you here." And John replied, "I am the voice of the one who cries out in the wilderness. Prepare the way, make straight the paths, for lo, the Prince of Peace will come and rule in love. Your prophet Malachi wrote down the words of God. And I will send Elijah unto you before the retribution day shall come, to turn again the hearts of men to God. And if they will not turn, lo, I will smite them with the curse. You men of Israel, you know your sins. As I passed by, I saw a wounded bird prone in your streets, and men of every class were beating it with clubs. And then I saw that Justice was its name. I looked again and saw that its companion had been killed. The pure white wings of righteousness were trampled in the dust. I tell you, men, your awfulness of guilt has made a cesspool of iniquity that sends a fearful stench to heaven. Reform, O Israel, reform. Prepare to meet your king." And then John turned away, and he went as he said. In 7 days, lo, I will stand in Gilgal by the Jordan ford, where Israel first crossed into the promised land. And then he left the temple court to enter it no more. But many people followed him as far as Bethany, and there he tarried in the home of Lazarus, his kin. The anxious people gathered all about the home and would not go. Then John came forth and said, "Reform, O Israel, reform. Prepare to meet your king. The sins of Israel do not all lie at the door of priests and scribe. Oh, think you not that all the sinners of Judea are found among the rulers and the men of wealth? It is no sign that man is good and pure because he lives in want. The listless, shiftless vagabonds of earth are mostly poor and have to beg for bread. I saw the very men that cheered because I told the priests and scribes of their injustice unto man, throw stones and beat poor justice in the streets. I saw them trample on the poor dead bird of righteousness. And you who follow after me, you commoners, are not one whit behind the scribes and priests in crime. Reform, you men of Israel, the king has come. Prepare to meet your king." With Lazarus and his sisters, John remained for certain days. In honor of the Nazarite, a feast was prepared, and all the people stood about the board. And when the chief men among the town poured out the sparkling wine and offered John a cup, he took it, held it high in the air, and said, "Wine makes glad the carnal heart, and it makes sad the human soul. It plunges deep in bitterness and gall the deathless spirit of man. I took the vow of Nazar when a child, and not a drop has ever passed my lips. And if you would make glad the coming king, then shun the cup as you would shun a deadly thing." And then he threw the sparkling wine out into the street. John went down to Jericho, and he abode there with Alphaeus. And when the people heard that he was there, they came in throngs to hear him speak. He spoke to none, but when the time was due, he went down to the Jordan ford, And to the multitudes he said, reform, and in the fount of purity wash away all your sins. The kingdom is at hand. Come unto me, and in the waters of this stream be washed, symbolic of an inner cleansing of the soul. And lo, the multitudes came down, and in the Jordan they were washed, and every man confessed his sins. For many months, in all the regions round about, John pled for purity and righteousness, and after many days he went again to Bethany, and there he taught. At first, few but the honest seekers came, but by and by the selfish and the vicious came with no contrition, came because the many came. And when John saw the unrepentant Pharisees and Sadducees come unto him, he said, You children of the vipers, stay. Are you disturbed by the news of coming wrath? Go to and do the things that prove repentance genuine. Is it enough for you to say that you are heirs of Abraham? I tell you, no. The heirs of Abraham are just as wicked in the sight of God when they do wrong as any heathen man. Behold the axe, and every tree that bears not wholesome fruit is cut down at the roots and cast into the fire. And when the people ask, What must we do? And John replied, Accept the ministry of helpfulness for all mankind. Spend not upon your selfish selves all that you have. Let him who has 2 coats give one to him who has no coat. Give part of all the food you have to those in need. And when the publicans came up and asked, What must we do? John answered them, Be honest in your work. Do not increase for selfish gain the tribute you collect. Take nothing more than your king demands. Take nothing more than what your king demands. And when the soldiers came and asked, What must we do? The harbinger replied, Do violence to none. Exact no wrongful thing, and be contented with the wages you receive. Among the Jews were many who had been waiting for the Christ to come, and they regarded John as Christ. But to their questions, John replied, In water I do cleanse, symbolic of the cleansing of the soul. But when he comes who is to come, lo, he will cleanse in holy breath and purify in fire. His fan is in his hand, and he will separate the wheat and the chaff. Will throw the chaff away, but garner every grain of wheat. This is the Christ. Behold, he comes, and he will walk with you, and you will know him not. He is the king. The latchet of his shoes I am not worthy to unloose. And John left Bethany and went again unto Jordan. We'll leave it there for now. It's quite a bit. Well, I mean, of all the things that can be said about John, badass has got to be at the first of the list, right? Because this man is hard. He is serious and he is for real. Yeah, so he spent his time of education, he spent in Egypt, instructed by Matheno. And then he comes back to Jerusalem and he lives in David's cave. And he's known as the Hermit of Engedi, or the Wild Man of the Hills. He's taken the oath of the Nazarites, the Nazarites, in which he won't shave his head and he won't drink and things like that. So he comes and he sits in the mart for 7 days, and then he tells the people to prepare to meet your king. And they wonder what preparation means, and he introduces them to the rite of baptism. Right? Of course, when he mentions that there is a king that is to come, the rulers get anxious because they want to know who is about to supplant them. But he tells them straight up, that he comes not as an antagonist. He comes as a prince of peace. He comes in love. But the truth is, even if he's going to educate the people who most are in want of hearing this message, that knowledge of self would be enough to overthrow a kingdom. So they should be worried because they've been using fear to rule. A lot of interesting things. His rebukes are harsh. You defraud your friends and foes. The priests, they place too harsh a burden in exacting their tribute from the people. The lawyers, doctors, and scribes, he calls them useless cumberers of the ground, which is pretty harsh. In this line, you are but tumors on the body of the state. That's descriptive, talks to them about, like, so they want to know who is he to say these things? Who is he that he who is he that he can rebuke the scribes, the priests, and the rulers? And he's like, I'm the voice who cries out. I'm the voice of the one who cries out in the wilderness. I see you ignore justice and righteousness, right? He talks about them being, the wounded birds of justice and righteousness that they beat in the streets. He calls their way of living and the guilt that they have a cesspool of iniquity. And, it's using the rite of baptism a way of cleansing the souls so that they're not a part, so those who would agree who are not a part will not be a part of that. I love the line that he says, it's no sign of, what's it? Okay. It's no sign that man is good and pure because he lives in want. That is so often a misconception about religion, right? That somehow you are more pious if you are more poor. If you give away everything you have and have nothing for yourself, that somehow that makes you more righteous than anyone else. And that's simply not the case, because you can be a steward of God's wealth and take care of yourself and help those around you, and your money is a blessing. Besides, if you're poor, other than a good thought, and a smile, what do you have to give of someone? And sure, those things are good, and they're a great place to start. But we can do more with having money and access than we can without. So I like that he makes the comment that, it's no sign of man that a man is good and pure just because he lives in want. Then he introduces the rite of baptism. It's an inner cleansing of the soul. The baptism itself is a symbolic rite of the inner cleansing of the soul. And the multitudes that are in alignment with that thought do come and they get baptized in the River Jordan. What else do we find here that is of interest? Do violence to none, exact no wrongful thing, and be contented with the wages you receive. I like that different aspects of society come to ask him what they should do in order to prepare, because he's telling everybody prepare that the king is coming, and so the publicans, the government workers, the tax collectors and such, they ask what can they do, and he says, don't increase the tariffs and taxes so that you can skim the difference. Do your job, which is to be a representative of the king and collect the king's wealth, but not try to enrich yourself at the same time. Just be honest in your work. How about that? The soldiers come and ask the same thing. What can they do? And he's like, don't use your position to do violence against other people, especially for fun. And we've seen that again and again, even today. Where those in authority in law enforcement overstep the bounds of their badge. And again, people want to know, well, is he the Christ? Because he's saying the things, and he's like, no, I'm not even fit to untie the shoes of the one who is to come. So what is his message, right? Cleanse yourself of iniquity, be honest, and prepare yourself for the coming of the Christ, which is the highest and the best. I think we'll leave it at that for now. That's enough for this week. It's nice to see John come back. We haven't seen him in a while. Okay. All right, so there we are. I'll see you next week with the next passage from the Aquarian. This is so much fun. I do love seeing you all. I do love sharing this material. And take this in your week, and I love you in the meantime. Bye.